Hi, team. Today I'm going to be talking about 7 questions you can ask yourself and your team before you start your AI investment. I'm going to be coming from a book and some additional questions that I've asked before, and we're going to get right into it starting now.
Round one, fight!
Hi, team. I'm Marcus, and I'm a management consultant, but I love to focus on the intersection of strategy and all things AI, all things Industry 4.0, all things emerging technology. I love that intersection. Yes, I am a data worker. I love my Python script just like everyone else, and I've done a little bit of AI work here and there. Um, but really, I love to come from a point of view that speaks to every person's role in the data process. And a lot of these videos and the video what we're going to talk about today, I'm talking from a point of view of how do you make sure you ensure success no matter what your role is, no matter how deep in the data you are, or maybe you're a manager, or maybe you are new to this and this is your first project and you're trying to make sure you go about it in the right way. This video is meant to help you. And really it's stuff that I'm just passionate about. I love to get in a room with clients and with colleagues and ask questions like these and make sure that projects are being set up in the right way. And so today we're going to be talking about 7 questions that you can ask yourself and your team before you even get started with the project. Once you know you want to do it and you think you know what the problem is that you're going to solve, these are questions that you can ask yourself and your team immediately to get clarity about what you're doing and whether it's the right thing to do, and maybe whether you should move forward to begin with. And so a lot of my things I'm going to talk about today, I adapted from this book. In the last video, I mentioned this book in ways, an unusual way that you can um, uh, improve the success of your AI investment. I'm loving this book. I'm going through it right now, just eating a little bit at a time. Later on, I will do a thorough review of the book and some themes to take out from it. And today, a lot of the questions that I'm going to pull out are either verbatim or adapted versions of the questions that they put in the book that you can ask yourself and your team before you get started. And yes, I've added a few more to it. And yes, you can add more to it. And this is meant to get your brain churning, get your team thinking about what can you ask ahead of time before you go and you put meetings on the calendar, before you start the clicking, before you start the project plans, all those things. And so I want to kind of, get us level set by just kind of, coming back and saying, why should we do this? And really, to me and to this book and to a lot of folks in this space, these questions that we're going to go over, it doesn't matter what your role is. There are multiple questions you can ask, and these are the beginning of them. And you want to ask these questions to get a better understanding of the problem. You want to ask these questions to better understand the impact. You want to ask these questions to better understand what you think is going to happen when this is all done. You want to know what the problem is, because as I said in other videos, a lot of teams move forward without really knowing what the problem is. And I think it was in Ray Dalio's Principles book. He said, you can never spend enough time getting in alignment with your team. And this is one of the reasons why you ask some questions, to make sure you understand what problem are you all actually tackling. You want to understand the impact, and by that I mean, how's this impacting your internal organization? What processes is this impacting? If we are able to answer this question, able to address this problem, what whose job will change? What will be different? What decisions will be made differently? And we'll get into a little bit of that. And then lastly, how what's the outcome? When do we know we're done? When do we know we're ready to hand off to another team? When do we know that we have answered the question that we needed to answer to address this problem? When do we know that? And when do we know that it's ready to be used by the business? Um, and so these questions will help to prime you all in thinking about those things and uncover things that you may not have thought about before. And with that, I want to go ahead and jump into the first question. Question one is, why is this problem important? Um, and it's trivial, but it's important. This should be the number one and first question that you ask, because one person or one team may think that this problem is important, but that may not be true for the entire organization. That may not be true for the customer. And so you really want to start with asking this question, and you want to ask it using a couple of questions to support, right? You want to ask, does this really keep us up at night? Or is this just exploratory? And it's okay if it's exploratory, but you really want to get to why it's important. And if it's exploratory, how does it move the business forward? How does it give us a competitive advantage? Why does this matter? Why does answering this problem matter? Who does it matter to? Um, is this a new problem? Or is this a problem we've already been addressing and are trying to solve in different ways, or we've already solved and you don't know about? Is the size of the prize. That helps you to understand why this is important. I like that phrase from the book. Another way to say that is, what is the expected ROI? Obviously, you may not have the exact numbers, but you should have a feeling about it before you really get committed to the work. And if you can't really get to that, you should not start your work. If you don't know what your expected ROI is, chances are you need to ask a lot more questions to get to the bottom of what you're doing, what problem are you addressing with this work, and then what you expect the outcome to be. So that takes us to the next question, which is, who does this problem affect? Um, And I like this question. I like this question a lot. I think in another video, I talked about why I love change management as a thing to think about when you're doing AI investments. Um, and this helps to start getting at that, but this also helps you to start understanding what needs to be re-engineered. I also do process re-engineering. This helps you to kind of find those places that you need to look at and focus on as a part of this overall project and making sure it's successful. You want to know whose process does this affect, and can they use the answer? Just assume that you're going to do it correct. You're going to be successful at the end. Think about whose process this is going to affect, and can they use it? What would they need to be able to use it? Who will be making decisions differently when this insight is created, when this question is answered? What customers will be impacted as a result of answering this question and implementing that answer? Important. If you're not thinking about that, you're missing something. um, uh, who will help to maintain and operationalize this once it's ready? Who from the business will validate the insight and say, yes, we do need to do this. Now that you guys have answered this question, we definitely need to implement this, and I will help to drive this. Or no, I believe in this. I will support it. Or yes, whatever the case may be, there should be some business input to validate what you believe, what you're producing after it's produced. And who is that? And then the catch-all is, who else needs to be known? Who knows needs to be notified once this is created? A prime example of this, a good example, is security. Security is always overlooked. And InfoSec may have some questions or thoughts about what you have. Public affairs may have some questions or thought about it. This also comes into play if you are a European country. Tons of things here, but the point is, you want to ask these questions so you get a real good feel of who's involved and who you need to involve and when you need to involve them in the overall project. And so with that, I want to go to the next question. This is a good one. What if we don't have the right data? We need to know upfront, is this data usable? Be sure that the data exists in the way that you think it does. A lot of times folks will say, oh, we got lots of data, and I think we can answer this question because we have a lot of data. And the data is tangential to everything but the data that you need. And so, or the data is there, but it's not owned by the company. And so you have to hop through some hurdles to hopefully get that data. Um, what is the origin story of that data? How is it being collected? Who collects it? Who owns it? Uh, who governs it? Again, we're going to talk about that maybe in the next video. Data governance plus AI. Um, how do we know it's the right data? Right? You should have some cursory view of that to make sure it is the right data. It has the right attributes, columns that you need, the right features that you need to be able to answer the question that you're trying to answer. Um, is that data still being produced? That's important because you're trying to make decisions. In most cases, we're doing this to affect everyday actions in business and things like this. Now, if that's not the case, then that's fair. If you're trying to do a retro to, think about things you should do moving forward, then this question is not as important. But if it is for active things that you're currently doing, you need to make sure the data is always able to be serviced up to your model or to your analytical product to give the business what they need. And can we consistently get it, which is basically what I was talking about before. So these are things you really want to ask. You want to know if you have the right data, can you get to it? Does it answer the right questions? Because if you don't ask this up front, you are going to waste a lot of time in the project trying to figure this out. Next up, the next question you should ask is, when is the project over? Do you know what the definition of complete is? I love this. I love this. I love this. I saw a project not too long ago where it was very clear what we wanted to build and the insights that it was supposed to produce, but that transition was not defined. And the flag was not raised until we were well into the project. And it took some time to really figure out what that gap was and what that road was. And so you want to ask, when is the project over? You want to have a high level definition of done. You want to have a high level definition of success criteria before you start the work. I don't care what anybody says. You should know that up front before you really commit to a project plan, before you commit resources and so forth. Who says that the project is done? Right? Who are the folks, the stakeholders that need to buy off on this to say that this is done? What changes when this is done? Be very clear about that. There should be some change. There's unless you're doing it for pure research, there should be some change once this is done. And how do we know that this is fully transitioned? I love asking this question because we always assume that it will just happen. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes the people aren't in place. Sometimes the processes aren't in place. And so the project doesn't end up being over when it should be because we don't know who will take it over when the original build team is done. And so I love that question. I think it's an important one. And it obviously is going to make you think about more things that you should be asking before you start your project. Next question. This one is great. I love it. What if we don't like the result? Do we have a definition of failure? Like, what does failure really look like? Or is there points for pivoting, right? What is the definition of failure? Do we still change the target process if we get a result that we don't like? That's a question you got to explore. And you probably need some other folks to help you talk through that, right? Because that could be a significant change. You might get an insight that really helps your business, but it's not the one that you were expecting. Are you going to use it? Or are you going to keep things status quo? Or just suppress it altogether and throw it away? Do you present what you found, the results that you found when it's done if you don't like the results? That's something you should talk about up front. Is there any way to repurpose the result that you don't like? Now, I've heard of some instances where that is possible. It's not always possible, but if you bring your team into it, you think about it and you think critically about it, you might find a way that you say, okay, our best case scenario ROI is A, but we know that there's a chance that the results may tell us number two, and so we're going to go with our ROI case B. if we get those kind of results, right? And so you want to think about that. You want to be, and you also want to think about whether you can actually do your second approach for gaining ROI if you don't get the results that you like. Um, and the last thing that I'll kind of throw out there is, you know, how do maybe it's repurposing in a different way or not, but you really want to know and really ask yourself, is there any way you can still get ROI out of this? And there's a lot of different ways to do this. You might bring in somebody else with a more with a different business perspective and mindset to say, "Oh, yes, I do know how we can use this data. I do know how we can use this product, this insight. Let me help you with repurposing that." You always want to think about that so you know what your playbook is and you know what you're doing, regardless of what you come up against. All right, next question. We're almost done. Does the prize outweigh the cost? Let's not assume that just because we've started committing to this and maybe you started already asking for money, maybe you already started organizing bodies, that once you go through this and you really think about the different ways that you can get ROI, doesn't mean that you still do it. In some cases, organizations will say yes. And it's because they are committed to really immersing their organization into moving into data science, right? And to leveraging that as a capability to create a competitive advantage. And so you might say yes. A lot of organizations will say no. But you really need to be objective about that. Really lay out the costs. You want to know, are there, now that you've gone through some of these questions, are there other costs that you didn't consider that should be factored in as a part of this? Are there other ways to make to add to this ROI now that you know all of these things? Do you have a threshold for the ratio that we're talking about here, right? So is there a certain point where you say, you know what, that margin is too skinny, we can't move forward with this? Is there a certain multiplier that you're expecting in ROI that says that you should move forward with this project? You should have that all figured out or at least discussed, because otherwise you're going to have to do a lot of figuring out later on if things don't go as expected. And so those are things that you should be asking before you start the project. It will help you get much clarity. It'll get your talking points around the value prop of this much clearer and succinct as well, so you can engage with the business and with your senior leaders on a much better level, and be able to answer questions that they might throw at you about it. And now that brings us to the last question, or at least the last question that I'll talk about today, which is, should we move forward? You must have a go, no go check gate as a part of this process. If you're not expecting to do that, you are not in the right place. You really need to know at the end of this, are you going to still move forward or not? And sometimes that doesn't mean that it gets completely squashed. You want to ask yourself, is this something we should do later? Is there something that would be easier to do if we did some penultimate work, right? That's something that I love to ask, right? You want to just really think about, what is your chance of success with this project? Is there a good chance of success? And really do some thinking about that. And you want to ask yourself, if you don't answer this problem, what is the impact? All these things will help you come to a place where you will say, you know what, we definitely need to do this. We need to find the right way to do this, even though the chance of success is low. Or you may say, you know what, actually, now that I've gone through this exercise, I'm not really sure we really need to do this. Or maybe we should revisit this in 6 months or a year. All those things are good. What you don't want to do is just blindly commit to it, or commit to it without going through this thought process. Get 3 months down the road, and then have a situation where now you're trying to explain to your leaders, explain to budget holders, explain to the business what you've done and whether it's good or not. You know, you don't want to get into that place. And so you do this up front so you can position yourself and your project for success. I obviously love this topic. I could talk about it all day. I try and keep these YouTube lives succinct. But I'm curious to hear from you. What are some questions that you ask before you start your AI investment? Do you think these are good questions, or do you think like, no, Marcus, these are these are basic. Everyone should be asking this. I'll tell you, everyone doesn't. But I want to know your thoughts. I want to know what questions you ask before you start your AI investments, and other things that you do before you get into your AI investment. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos on how do you prepare strategically for your AI investment. I'm going to be talking about AI portfolios, and how do you build those. I'm going to be talking about decision science and data governance and all these different intersections with AI and emerging technologies over the course of time. I would love to hear from y'all. Put your comments, your thoughts in the comments. And in the meantime, be well and stay strategic. Talk to you guys soon.